Diabetes Connections is brought to you by the only ultra-rapid acting inhaled insulin, by Dexcom, keeping you in control with an integrated system for diabetes management, and by VIVI Cap, keeps your insulin at the exact right temperature, even in extreme heat or cold.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, delaying a T1D diagnosis. I'm talking to one of the first families to use the newly approved Tzield for their son as a regular patient outside the clinical trials. How exactly does this all work? Who's eligible? And how do you cover the enormous financial cost? As always, this podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome back to another week of the show. You know, I'm always so glad to have you here. And we aim to educate and inspire about diabetes with a focus on people who use insulin. And one of the stories we've been following for a long time now is that of Teplizumab, a drug to delay the onset of type 1 diabetes. I want to take a step back before we jump into this family that is using Teplizumab, now brand name Tzield, in their son, just to make sure that we're all on the same page here. For a long time, groups like TrialNet and other researchers have been trying to kind of pinpoint the causes of type 1 diabetes, or at least see what's going on in the bodies of people who develop it. They figured out that there are autoantibodies related to diabetes, and they have separated type 1 into a few stages. The problem is that diabetes symptoms do not typically appear, you don't get a diagnosis until you're in stage 3. And that's what most of us think of as type 1 diabetes. But these researchers are saying, no, that's stage 3. And if we can catch this and diagnose this at stages 1 or 2, can we perhaps prevent a person from ever getting to those later stages where they need intensive insulin and blood glucose management? In November of 2022, Teplizumab gained FDA approval for use in people ages 8 and older with stage 2 type 1 diabetes, 2 positive diabetes-related autoantibodies, and elevated pre-diabetes range blood sugars. It's now called Tzield, and I'm going to refer to it as Tzield going forward. In 2021, I shared this story of 16-year-old Alex, who at the time was marking 1 year with type 1, and he had spent almost that entire year in the study leading up to the Tzield approval. I will link up that episode along with some of the older ones we did with TrialNet and with the researchers very much involved in these studies. Alex is still doing great. He's Benny's age, and I see his parents. They come to my meetups in the Charlotte area, so I'm thrilled that he is doing so well. But this week, I want to bring you the story of high school sophomore William Troutman. His family is also here in the Charlotte area, but had to travel to Virginia because that's the closest TrialNet affiliate. It's the closest place that they are doing this preventative treatment of Tzield. So you're going to hear from William's mom, Amanda, and in a couple of weeks, you're going to hear from Dr. Bryce Nelson, who was the doctor involved in all this. He is the chief of endocrinology at Children's Hospital of Richmond, where the treatment took place. But I wanted to get the personal story from Amanda because I was curious what it's like for a family going through this. And there's a price tag, there's a personal cost, and they also have a daughter who already has type 1 diabetes. And we will hear their story in just a minute. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Afrezza. And how many times have you miscalculated timing of a mealtime insulin dose? This happens to Benny quite a bit. You dose after you order, and then the restaurant gets busy, and your meal takes longer than expected. Or you just forget to bolus, or you bolus too late, and then you have to deal with the high blood sugars. If that happens to you, it might be time to think about Afrezza inhaled insulin. Afrezza uses a breath-powered inhaler to quickly deliver insulin powder into the lungs and bloodstream. It's fast in, fast out. In fact, with Afrezza, insulin's released in the bloodstream in less than 1 minute and may start to lower blood sugar in about 12 minutes. Ask your doctor if Afrezza is right for you. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Afrezza logo. Afrezza can cause serious side effects, including sudden lung problems and low potassium, and is not for patients with chronic lung disease such as asthma or COPD, or for patients allergic to insulin. Tell your doctor if you ever smoked, ever had kidney or liver problems, a history of lung cancer, or if you're pregnant or breastfeeding. Most common side effects are low blood sugar, cough, and sore throat. Severe low blood sugar can be fatal. Do not replace long-acting insulin with Afrezza. Afrezza is not for use to treat diabetic ketoacidosis. Please see full prescribing information, including boxed warning, medication guide, and instructions for use on Afrezza.com/safety. Amanda, welcome to Diabetes Connections. I am so interested to talk to you today. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
You got it. How's everybody doing? How's your family? How are you? Both kids have type 1. What's going on in your family right now?
We are thrilled. We have managed our type 1 diabetes for our daughter, who is 13, I think fairly well over the past 2 years. And shortly after, we found out that our son also had the hormones and a couple of other things going on. So we've kind of been living in this world of knowing eventually the shoe would drop and our son would also have type 1. But, we've been managing it as best we can, trying to keep life as normal. She's doing really well as far as her control and management and playing sports. Both kids very active. And of course, we were thrilled around Thanksgiving to hear about Tzield's approval. So that's been a whirlwind of emotions and tasks and travel, but we've gotten it done now. So we are letting out a deep sigh of relief for a little while and just enjoying this sort of, I call it an extended childhood for my son. He's 16. Right. So he's the older of the two children we have.
Let's talk about your daughter first, because as you said, she was diagnosed in 2020, right? Tell us that story.
Sure. Her name is Jenna, and she was 11 at the time. And we had just moved from a town outside Williamsburg called Poquoson, Virginia. And so we had moved to Richmond, Virginia, and it was the middle of the pandemic. And, so we were doing a lot of family things and, just enjoying the summer. And right about school starting back, after Labor Day, she started just feeling very exhausted, going to the restroom all the time, drinking all the time. And now I see these as classic type 1 symptoms, but we have no family history. So I had no idea. And of course, were all worried about COVID. And so we took her to 2 different urgent cares. And the first one ran COVID test, mono, all these different things, and said, she's just got a bug. Something's going on. She's all right. But they came out to our car. So they didn't weigh her, stick her finger, have her use the restroom in a cup or anything like that. So the next step was we just tried to get her some rest and see how things would go. And she just kept being sick. So the second urgent care we went to, we didn't have family care established yet in Richmond, was a place where we went inside and we were able to do blood work. And that was kind of what I was looking for. The hard part was they weighed her and she had lost 10 pounds since May. So from May to September, she'd lost 10 pounds. She was already small. Yeah. I said, no, she can't have lost 10 pounds. Get back up there. That's incorrect. You did it wrong. But sure enough, she had lost 10 pounds and they didn't stick her finger. They just came back and said, well, we're going to send this off since she's pediatrics. And I was like, no, I would have gone to the emergency room. So later that night, I had a girlfriend who was actually, by the grace of God, a type 1. And she was a diabetes nurse educator. And I said, I've been looking online. Is this what it is? And she's like, it sounds like it. Go buy a glucose kit. Or she said glucometer. I was like, I don't even know what that is. So my husband went out and bought it. And we tested her a couple hours after dinner and she was 565. So I said, what does that number mean? And she said, it means go to the emergency room. So we stayed in the ICU for 5 days and she was in DKA. So she was very ill. And it was hard during COVID because it was really supposed to be just one parent. Yeah. Thankfully, we snuck my husband in there. Both of us were able to be there for the education part, which was great. And my parents came out and kept my son. So it was just kind of like, into the deep end of information. And I had never given someone else an injection, let alone calculated, with needles and vials and pens. And, I had no clue. So we were very shocked. And they did tell us that they confirmed her autoantibody hormones, that she did have the presence of those. So it was confirmed type 1. She did not have celiac. So we definitely knew that it was type 1. So that was kind of the beginning.
Wow. When my son was diagnosed, it was 2006. And the first time I ever heard, yeah, he was 2. But the first time I ever remember hearing about TrialNet until he went to camp several years later. Now, as soon as I heard about it, the limits at the time were on the parents' ages. So my husband was older, but I was young enough to do it. So we did, but it was a big deal. It was a blood draw. And I remember thinking at the time, like, maybe I'll have my daughter do it as well. But I didn't really want to because, it seemed like such a big deal to do the blood draw. But you did it immediately and it wasn't as intensive, right?
That's correct. It reminded me of a lot of the programs that are out there now for food allergies or the DNA sampling. And it was more than a finger stick. It was definitely a small vial, but all of us did it. And it was a big family activity one night. And we mailed it off. And I had originally heard about it in my deep dive of all information diabetes and heard about it and said, we have a 5% chance of, since we now have a family member. And it was free. And I thought, I was requesting every bit of information I could get. I just wanted that piece of mail that said, you're free, only one of your children. And unfortunately, that's not what happened, but we're making the best of it now. So the information was key to get that. And originally we found that out in November or December of 2020. And we had hoped that Teplizumab or Tzield would be approved the following July by FDA. And unfortunately, it was not.
Right.
So we thought, well, I'm still glad we know because we can prepare. And I think my son sort of enjoyed those extra carbs a little bit more, knowing that soon enough, his time may come when we were a little more cognizant. We do let our daughter eat largely what she needs and wants. And if she's 13, she goes to those parties and eats the cupcakes and pizza and whatnot. But just our son to know that he would eventually, not if, but when he would also have type 1 was good information for our family.
I'm really curious about the process here. So when you get the test kit, you said your family did it. It's like basically a small vial of blood. You send it back, you get the results. What happens when you get the results? Is it literally a letter in the mail that says, sorry, your kid has these autoantibodies and will likely develop diabetes? Does somebody call you? I mean, I've got to imagine I would have wanted a person and some counseling. Did that happen?
Yes, it did.
Okay.
We did our testing through TrialNet, and I believe there's a few other organizations that are testing, but we were with TrialNet, and we had a research coordinator call us, and she was very kind and said, we'd like to set up an appointment to speak with you. Our chief of endocrinology would like to talk to you about your test results. And of course, my mom radar was like, no, tell me now. And so we were able to speak with her at that point, and she did confirm that we had the hormones, that one of our family members, and eventually I feel like I bullied her enough to that we had the information. And she was wonderful, though, very explained things carefully and what our results had come back with. And originally through TrialNet, our son was positive for 2 of the autoantibodies. And following that, we set up monitoring. Unfortunately, at that time, the original Teplizumab trial was closed. They had already taken all of their trial participants, and so that window was closed, and the next hope was to get the actual FDA approval.
Got it.
So we did participate, though, out of an effort for goodwill to be monitored. So our son agreed to that. He got paid a little bit of money each time, which was exciting. He was saving for a mountain bike at the time. So we went and had him monitored, and what that involved was simply an appointment at a TrialNet center. And I'm learning they're all over the country. And when we submitted his blood work, all of our blood work, we then essentially became part of the database. So I'm learning now you can't yet get Tzield, at every endocrinologist, but the TrialNet centers where the blood work was shipped closest to was where we were essentially plugged into. And those were the doctors available to us who wanted us to monitor. We did. We stayed in touch with Dr. Nelson. And then as soon as that FDA approval came out, we were on the horn. We were reaching out back to Dr. Nelson, to our local endocrinologist here. And she was wonderful, our local endo. And she did do a lot of the homework and due diligence to determine, how quickly can we get this? It does feel quite like the time is ticking. We did confirm that our son, through the monitoring, had dysglycemia. They did the test. It's a very sugary liquid. A lot of women drink this when they're testing for gestational diabetes and pregnancy.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I had that.
So,
That's delicious.
Yes. Oh, he loved it.
Oh, it's so gross.
He
It's
did
like
not.
the sweetest. Oh, he did not. Yeah, it's
no,
like the sweetest orange crush you'll ever drink. It's like horrible.
Yes. So he drank that, and they came in to test essentially how well his pancreas was functioning. So that would put him, the hormones made him stage 1 of prediabetes. And then he did not pass the glycemia test. which tested the function of his pancreas. So that made him stage 2. They would come in and do blood draws every so often after he drank the liquid, and they confirmed, unfortunately, his pancreas is not processing the sugar in his body well enough. So that meant he was a candidate for Tzield if and when it were approved.
Yeah, so I'm curious. Obviously, that drink and other tests showed that he was in the early stages. At that time, do you remember what kind of blood sugars was he having?
We did test his blood sugar fairly often with his sister's kid, and just to kind of monitor, because the statistics say if they have more than one hormone present, they have some likelihood of developing. But if you have 2 or more hormones, you're approaching 97 to 99% within 5 years. So it was a question of not if, but when. So he was very aware that any day he could essentially flip over and need that insulin. Our daughter probably needed insulin for months during her pre-DKA episode, but our son was kind of thinking, we could catch this early and hopefully avoid, staying in the hospital and those very grave situations. So if he was ill, we would check his sugar. If he just felt off, a lot of times in the mornings, just before his day started, before he ate, we would test his numbers. And I believe it's 126 is the number for insulin dependency, maybe 123. But his numbers were always in the 90s, lower 90s. Now, you and I sitting here, we're probably 70 pre-eating and whatnot. But he was escalating not very quickly. His A1C was 5.3 and 5.4. So with the TrialNet program, we did have that information. So he was getting up there.
It's interesting, and I'll have to follow this up with a discussion with one of the endocrinologists or people involved with these trials and with Tzield, because I have 2 friends, and of course, through the years, I know a lot of people, probably more people with diabetes than most people, but I have 2 friends who have 2 or 3 markers and have never developed type 1. It's been 10 years.
Wow.
So I'm curious what they look for candidates. Obviously, you said for most people, it's a matter of when, not if. But I'm curious. So it's obviously not a question that you and I as lay people can really answer. But that's why I was asking about the blood sugars, because I was curious where they wound up.
The label indicates the dysglycemia needs to also be present in order for the Tzield to be approved. Now, I read something recently that said, we cannot control what the endocrinologists do, but I think for insurance approval and that sort of thing, the dysglycemia would need to be present to kind of check all those FDA-approved boxes.
Makes perfect sense. All right, so Tzield is approved. What happens to you all next? Right back to my conversation with Amanda. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. And Dexcom has a diabetes management software system called Clarity. Do you use this? For a very long time, longer than I'd like to admit, I thought it was something just for our endo. But it's really helpful. And now I have it on my phone. You can use it on the desktop or get it as an app. It's an easy way to keep track of the big picture. I liked using it when we were adjusting things. It was nonstop there for quite a while. But now, Benny's 18. He seems to be leveling out on changing basal rates, at least for now. But Clarity helps us see longer-term trends and helps me not overreact for just 1 hour of blood glucose. And when you share the reports with your care team, it's easy for them to get a great idea of what's going on and how they can help. Managing diabetes is not easy, right? But I feel like we have one of the best CGM systems working for us. Find out more at diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. Now back to Amanda explaining the steps they took when they first heard Tzield was approved.
Well, we just started to work towards getting William essentially established care, because prior to the approval, he had only been a research participant. He was not a patient with an endocrinologist anywhere. We just kind of had this information, but there was really nothing to do with it other than watch his symptoms. So then we kind of went down our local endocrinologist path, who our daughter sees here locally in Charlotte. And then we also simultaneously went down the path of getting back on board with Dr. Nelson through TrialNet, which was definitely the quickest path. Even though it took a little while, I think a lot of those hurdles have now been set up through Virginia Commonwealth University Children's Hospital. So they have now set up and established processes through the infusion clinic. The staffing has been trained. It will be very seamless moving forward is my imagination for that sort of situation.
Yeah. And just to jump in and ask, to be clear, you mentioned your daughter's endo is here. You and I both live in the Charlotte area, but they did not offer Tzield. Is that why you went back to Virginia?
So endocrinology does not currently have essentially processes set up with infusion clinics.
Got it.
So they needed to set up a lot of those things. And sadly, the oncology departments are actually very backed up. And many of these children's facilities do not operate on the weekends. So of course, they take emergent cases through the emergency department. But as far as staffing, that was a hurdle as well. I know that when our son had his infusion, there would be folks there too, at least from pharmacy, security, registration, the nursing staff. William's doctor was present. Lab work was done. So there was a staffing camaraderie that had to happen in order to get that set up. I had not envisioned that. Now, I will say that we did investigate the path of home health, and that is something that Prevention Bio has said is approved if your insurance wants to go that route. However, we were crossing state lines, and Dr. Nelson and my husband and I agreed that we preferred to be in office so that William could be monitored for allergic reactions or any kind of side effects. That made us feel more comfortable.
Right. I know Dr. Nelson. He's such a great guy. He must have been so excited. Can you share a little bit about your conversations with him?
I mean, he was fabulous. We all need advocates for our children. We need to be advocates for our children, for ourselves, to own our healthcare. And I truly felt like Dr. Nelson was just as much a champion for my son's needs, for our family. I mean, it was like he was our family, and we really appreciate it. He went to battle getting these things approved, rushed. He understands the science to the nth degree, of course, but he cared deeply about William and about children, particularly he's a pediatric endo primarily, to get children into this, because this is the first improvement in diabetic care outside of insulin known to us. So it's an incredible, currently the medicine would only be approved for once per lifetime. However, the goal is to repeat this treatment several years from now. They don't have the data yet on the when and how and what, but my dream is for my child to repeat this medication treatment indefinitely and to never essentially develop type 1 diabetes. That would be amazing. But Dr. Nelson, we couldn't have done it without him. And the staff there was wonderful. And it was a great process, completely worth it, for sure.
Great. Tell us a little bit about the process. We've mentioned infusion a couple times. So to be clear, this is an in the hospital, or as you said, some people can do it at home, but in the hospital, IV treatment. What was that all about?
Yes. So we traveled to Richmond, and the first day, William actually had a PICC line installed. And for my layman's terms, the way I understood that was in between an IV every day and a port. So kind of the halfway between those two things, so that every day he did not have to get a new IV, if you will, installed into his arm. So we went to radiology first, and he was not put to sleep, but there was an option for that because he is under 18. And they, through ultrasound, and he stated it was very painless, just had a little lidocaine, and they installed a port. He could see it on the screens, whatnot. He was fascinated. But so they installed a port that essentially allowed the nursing staff to give him all the medicine he needed just with that one set of tubing in his arm. And he just wore like a small sleeve over it for the 2 weeks while we were there. And then we went over to the infusion clinic and had a beautiful view overlooking downtown Richmond. And the first thing that they did was they do lab work to kind of establish a baseline. Part of the side effects or risk, if you will, is decreased lymphocytes, which is one of the blood cells. It's kind of an indicator of the health of our bloodstream at the time. And then they tested for cytokine release. So just some of the side effects thankfully, William did not have any issues. He was a little more tired, but I think that could have been just from some of the other medications he received. He did receive pre-medication, Tylenol, Zofran to keep him from getting nauseous, from the Benadryl. So he did receive Benadryl to kind of protect him should he have any kind of reaction. We did that the first 5 days. So we would go in and they'd do the lab work, wait for it to come back. They gave him the Tylenol and the Zofran, let those set in. And then they gave him the Benadryl, which did make him a little bit loopy. But they backed off of that and that was fine. And that was really the only feeling he got from any medication. So most people in the trial who had any sort of adverse effects had it within the first 5 days. William had none of those things. His labs were fairly, repetitive is not the right word, but they resembled the lab participants or the trial participants. So he then was able to back off of the Zofran and the Benadryl. So week 1, we were at the hospital for a longer period of time. So we had the labs, the pre-medication, waited for those, and then the Tzield came over the IV next, or the PICC line next, and that took about 30 minutes. And then they did a flush, or they observed him, and then they flushed the line, and we went home. So,
and you did that for 2 weeks.
We did. The second week was much quicker. So we ran labs every day just to kind of watch his numbers and make sure he was still in healthy range. Liver function was evaluated. We never felt that he was kind of, wild, wild west of medicine since it's a new drug. We felt very safe. The team was very observant of, are you itching? Are you hot? Do you have a fever? Very keen to allergic reactions possible. And thankfully we didn't have any of that. So the second week was much quicker. And, he did schoolwork on his laptop when he got back to the room. So.
Wow. So I know I'm making you go through every little bit of this, but I know people are really curious about it. What happens next? What happens after those 2 weeks?
Oh, we've been celebrating. We've been very thankful. But as far as activity, his PICC line was removed by Dr. Nelson on the last day he was there. And we kind of made sure that no adverse reactions. It was totally fine. And the next day he was back at track practice. He went to school. He's back with his friends and he feels great. So thankfully he feels good as new. He had 0 symptoms of diabetes before, of course, but he definitely has no symptoms from the medication. So now we're actually going to have some labs run here locally that will go to Dr. Nelson kind of just to evaluate numbers. And we have some follow-up appointments with Dr. Nelson that we'll go back for. But perhaps every 6 months, we will look into that. So we have appointments set, and I guess in theory, they'll watch for any rises in glucose and trends, but hopefully the label says 24, 25 months, but I've read about people delaying their type 1 as many as 6 years or more. And you mentioned a friend at 10 years. So we are hoping for the best and hoping in the meantime that Prevention Bio can get repeat usage approved so that people like William can delay again.
Yeah. Now, to be clear, my friend with the 10-year has never had any treatment. She's just has identified as having the markers.
Okay.
So no treatment.
I hope it stays that way.
Me too. We all do. Okay. So nosy question here. Prevention Bio has said that Tzield will probably cost about $13,800 per vial, which is almost $200,000 for its 14-day course. Did your insurance cover all of that? I mean, that's incredible for me to think about.
It is incredible. And that's a perfectly reasonable question, and I don't mind answering. We did go through the insurance route, and initially we were actually declined. Wow. And we were devastated, and we're, oh my goodness, how are we going to do this? And of course, we understand any delay, 2-year delay, whatnot, is certainly, it's worth an investment. But we went through the process. We said, all right, what's next? So an appeal was next. And Dr. Nelson wrote a very compelling letter, factual, empathetic, and just a wonderful case for our son and for really just why this drug is great. The reason they listed as denied is that it was a very new drug.
Right. And
they need to ensure the safety, which boggled my mind. It's been an FDA approval. They've been studying this drug for over 10 years. But anyway, so we waited. Another piece that was happening simultaneously is our insurance is through my husband's employer. It's actually a self-funded plan. So he went to his own company HR administrators of the plan and kind of pled his case there. So from the other side of it, we have a self-insured plan. You can essentially dictate what your plan pays for. The people in charge of it can dictate what they approve. So at the same time, we had a very compelling letter from William's doctor, as well as the employer saying, this is important. We need to pay for this. We need to approve it, essentially. So currently, the insurance has approved it. But then another great thing about it, they are covering their part, but Prevention Bio also has a patient assistance program for the remainder. And that is something that people can apply to. I imagine many people will be approved for that program for financial assistance for the remainder that the insurance does not cover. So there is assistance out there for the program.
Yeah, I know Prevention Bio is working hard to get it covered because it's no use to them if no one can pay for it. And they do have a patient support program, as you mentioned. So, and as you listen, I think you've made such a great point there, Amanda, in that if you have any kind of questions about what your company's plan covers, pump supplies or insulin, going to your company's HR department can be incredibly helpful. I can't tell you how many people I've heard from whose doctor has written appeal after appeal. And yet when they go to their HR department, it's so much easier in some cases for them to say, oh yeah, we should cover that.
Yes. And because the insurance company is paid by the employer.
Right.
So they're the boss.
Okay. Again, I don't know if you can answer this or if you want to answer this, but how is your daughter doing with all of this? She has type 1. This is not something that was available for her.
I know. It is bittersweet to think that we were essentially so close to the approval and, 2 years over the span of, how long insulin has been available. It is incredible. You are exactly right. And I was worried that she would feel like she missed the boat. But I think she is in a place where she is doing all the things she wants to do. She plays soccer and cross country and basketball. And we do let her eat what she largely wants. She can't eat everything all the time, but she does still eat her pancakes and whatnot. But, I think there was a moment where there was a little bit of disappointment, but she adores her brother. And I think she loves that he won't have to go through all that she went through yet. So he may eventually be there as well. And I think it'll be something, I don't want to say the word special, but it'll be something the two of them share that only really each of them can understand. But I think she's ultimately happy for him as much as a 13-year-old can be happy for someone else. So we are very fortunate. They love each other and are very happy for the other one. But sure, there was a moment when I think the dots connected and she realized she was pretty close.
Yeah.
It's interesting. My husband and I are people of deep faith. And throughout this process, the first time that Teplizumab was declined by the FDA, I was devastated. I thought this is going to be great for him. And he just said, we're just going to keep praying. We'll keep waiting. And it made me feel a little bit like, no, we need to be preparing. It's not going to happen. It's over. Like, we just need to get ready. And sure enough, he was right. And it was approved. And here we are. So we are still praying for an ultimate cure for diabetes, and improvements of care are coming all the time. And we are some of the renegades who are doing DIY loop. And Jenna has great care through that. And she's got great technology. So a lot of good things are happening for her. So she's made peace with that, I think.
Yeah. Before I let you go, you had mentioned earlier that your dream is that your son can have this treatment again and possibly again, and never develop type 1. Is that something that anyone has mentioned to you is a possibility? Like, has Dr. Nelson or Prevention, is that something that they are thinking about doing?
I have listened to a few podcasts where the gentleman's name is Francisco. I can't call his last name. He's one of the top researchers. And that is the ultimate goal, is that Teplizumab has many T cell indications, and it can prove several. The goal, of course, is that it would also improve other autoimmune issues that are tied to the T cells. And, if it can go into the body and protect the beta cells that produce insulin once, I'm not sure that they would know why it couldn't do it again. So it's certainly still in the research stages, and that's a lofty goal. But I think it's in my mind, it's my non-medical mind, not medically trained. That seems like it should be reasonable.
I'm going to have to look that up. That's interesting. I hadn't heard him say that.
I do have to say that Prevention Bio has a great program set up to help parents navigate this. And the first day, the Friday after it was approved, I was on the telephone speaking with their customer service, and I was assigned a liaison, and he was wonderful. I could call him every day and say, what do we need to do next? How do we navigate insurance? How do we get this letter? Please call and check up on this. And so they have a great advocate system set up, and that helped me figure the process out and not feel so overwhelmed in finding how we get this done. So that was very helpful. And then the other thing is just, I've heard one or two people say, well, I've got a child with type 1. I don't really want to, my son doesn't want to know, or my daughter doesn't want to know if she has it, which I would just strongly encourage parents to get all the information they can and to take the initiative and to work hard to avoid this freight train of type 1 diabetes. Because if it can be avoided, it is truly freedom from a lifetime of glucose management, the insulin care. It is unbelievable how worth it is. And certainly I think parents realize that who already have a child or a family member with type 1, but to take the initiative, to be brave, to be bold, to do the work. And we're on the other side of it now, and we're breathing deep sighs of relief and gratitude. So that's the last thing I would like to say.
Amanda, thank you so much for joining me, and all the best to you and to
Thank
William
you.
And to Jenna. And definitely
Thank you.
check back in and keep us posted.
And thank you for all you're doing to spread the word about Tzield and to improve and educate the lives for type 1 diabetics. We appreciate all that you are doing.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
As always, more information at diabetes-connections.com. I'm going to link up a really great local article that was written about the Troutman family. I will link up more information about Tzield and the previous episodes that we have done when it was Teplizumab leading up to its approval. And then, as I said, a couple of weeks from now, I'll be talking to the endocrinologist who was really vital in getting this family approved. And I want his perspective on not only, how this works and what the process is, but, opinion on the cost and who is eligible for this. What is this going to mean going forward? More to come. But first, Diabetes Connections is partnering with Tempramed. They make the VIVI Cap. This is such a smart product. It keeps your insulin at the exact right temperature, even in extreme heat or cold. A lot of people are going on spring break soon, or if you're getting ready for summer, whether it's camp or you live in the South, and it just gets really hot. This is a fantastic product. It fits on any insulin pen. You simply take the regular cap off and you slide on the VIVI pen. And that's it. It lasts for years. It is 24/7, 365 protection. And they've got a 30-day money-back guarantee. So you can't go wrong. If you decide it's not for you, you're going to get your money back. I've heard from a bunch of you. They are working on one for vials, but right now it is for pens only. We're really fortunate we can get a backup pen prescription from our endocrinologist. And so that way, we've always got a couple of pens on hand, and Benny puts the VIVI Cap on, and it is good to go. Find out more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the VIVI Cap logo. There will also be a link in the show notes wherever you are listening to this episode. Looking at the schedule, I always like to talk about where I am going, but let me take a second to talk about where I have been. Late last month, I went to Greensboro, North Carolina for the JDRF Summit that happened there, and it was a lot of fun. Keynoter was Rob Howe, a familiar name to many of you. He has a terrific podcast. He's been very active in the online community. And I got to meet a lot of people in the Greensboro area, and people came from all over North Carolina, but it was mostly in that part of the state. That was great. This past weekend, I froze my tush off in Syracuse. I go back almost every year for a college radio station reunion, and we do a conference for the students. It's really nice. That was this past weekend. And I got to tell you, here in Charlotte, it's been so nice. The weather's been in the high 70s. It was so hard to go to Syracuse this weekend, but all my friends were yelling at me to just, tough it out. But there's a reason why I moved here. And then coming up, I got to tell you, March right now looks pretty quiet, which I'm kind of grateful for. We have a lot going on behind the scenes. April is going to be the last college visits before Benny makes up his mind. And then I have some big stuff coming up in May and June, so I'll be sure to talk to you about that. Not everything is set, so I don't want to mention it yet, but we've got Mom's Night Out announcements coming and lots of good stuff on the way. In the meantime, lots of great tech episodes coming up with Tandem, and I have been banging on the door of Omnipod and Beta Bionics to bring you more information from these folks. So hopefully we'll have those episodes coming soon. All right, thank you as always to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here soon. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.